iconic event on how do we end digital poverty. Firstly, on the panel we're going to have today on speakers is a technology businessman, philanthropist, Lord Lieutenant of the Queen for Greater London, and his points are wider society views and why it is optimistic for the future. So Kenneth, without further ado, over to you.
Thank you, Michael. If we could have the first slide up, Alan. Good evening, everybody. Interesting day today, one of those moments in history. Not only are we holding this enormous event, I'm pleased to see we have almost 200 people now joined us, but also, of course, President Biden was inaugurated. And I enjoyed watching his speech for several reasons. I'm apolitical these days, so I won't mention any of the reasons other than the fact that he focused our attention on American values, on fundamental values. And I want to do the same, it won't be as long as his speech, but I want to do the same for this evening, just to set the scene so that the rest of the conversation we're going to have will be in some sense of context. My credentials for doing that are twofold, really. I am, as Michael said, Her Majesty's Lord Lieutenant of Greater London, so I have the task, the delicious task, the privilege of upholding the dignity of the monarchy in this great capital city. And as you can see, I'm a past master of the Worshipful Company of Information Technologists, and therefore, hence my pride for what we're doing today. But it has given me a particular focus on what our values are. So I'm going to show you 5 images, if we could go to the next slide, and I want you to observe how they affect you when you see the picture. This is something which seemed so important last June, the ditching of a statue of a man, Colston, who died 300 years ago. The trigger for this, of course, was the Black Lives Matter movement, which is something which ran through our country and tested our consciences in all sorts of ways. As the next slide, I think, will remind us. There were demonstrations for the Black Lives Matter movement and there were demonstrations against it. And many of you will remember this particularly iconic picture of a protester who's been injured, being rescued by an anti-protester or a counter-protester, being carried out with 4 other of the counter-protesters protecting them so that there was no more violence. That was rather a negative, but rather, I think, very powerful image of last year. But if I take you to the next slide, what COVID did for us, if Black Lives Matter tested our consciences, COVID tested our health system, obviously, our stamina, and our sense of community. And one of the most amazing appearances was the support for food for those who needed it. This is a picture of an organization called Food for All, who delivered 5,000 hot meals a day to the needy of London. And they came out of nowhere to be able to do that, along with many others who helped each other. The next picture is of an event that occurred in the middle of the year when Her Majesty the Queen took part in a private service, just her in Westminster and her equerry in Westminster Abbey. He is there laying a wreath, which is a replica of her wedding bouquet, a wedding posy, on the tomb of the unknown soldier. Now, many of you will have been to Westminster Abbey in your lifetime, and you will all have walked, if you have, past the tomb of the unknown warrior. But I wonder whether you've ever questioned why it's there in the Abbey and not in a more obvious place, for example, by the cenotaph. The answer is written on the inscription there, because he was buried, the unknown warrior, amongst kings, because of his contribution to his ultimate sacrifice to help others within the nation. And the Queen's private service reminds us of her great commitment to faith, and the equerry, Major TA, I think adds a certain extra power to the image. So a lot happened last year. COVID testing our health and our economic systems, Black Lives Matter testing our consciences. We all had rather forgotten about Brexit, which had divided us as recently as December of last year. And perhaps the most dramatic reminder of how we'd put Brexit and the social and family divisions behind us and have begun to focus on what really matters is in my last picture. Everyone will remember this image. It is Her Majesty knighting Captain Tom Moore, now Sir Tom Moore. You will remember that he achieved something remarkable. He connected with the zeitgeist of the nation by and demonstrating his authority and his power to do that, albeit not his ability to forecast, because he set about raising £10,000 for the local NHS and ended up raising £32 million for the NHS. What I think is remarkable is not what he did, though what he did is remarkable, but what is much more remarkable is all of those people in this country who put their hands in their pockets and contributed £32 million to help strangers, people they will never meet, because that's what we do in this country. And I think those images provide a useful reminder of what we saw last year, and I think sets a very helpful platform for what we're going to be talking about this evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Sir Kenneth. Thank you. Moving on to the CEO of the Good Things Foundation, the charity view on problems we face and approach. And I bring Helen Milner, OBE.
Good evening, everybody. I'm really pleased to be here, although the problem with us meeting on Zoom is I have a coffee, and I'm sure if we were in person, I'd have a lovely glass of wine. So I love the fact we're here for a call to action, and this slide basically just says follow me on Twitter at Helen Milner and hashtag fix the digital divide. And the next slide shows that our vision at Good Things Foundation is a world where everyone benefits through digital. I'm sure one of the words that we're going to use a lot today is partnership, and the way that we work at Good Things Foundation is to work in partnership. Most importantly, with those red dots on that map. So that is the UK, and those dots are all of our community partners up and down the country working tirelessly to support people who are digitally excluded. And we can do that because we also have partnerships at a national and international level with a large number of businesses and public sector and third sector organisations, as you can see on the slide. So the next slide shows our digital nation. So each year we collect all the most important facts and stats about digital exclusion in the UK, and we create an infographic. I'm not going to read you all of the stats on here. You can find this, and you can find the sources online by searching for Digital Nation 2020. But the salient facts are 9 million people in the UK can't use the internet without support. There are 7 million households who don't have internet access, and 23%, so that's almost a quarter of all children in social group DE, so the lowest social group, don't have internet access at home. This year, we also focused the Digital Nation infographic around data, particularly around COVID, and you can find those there. But the most important thing about this picture is that huge chasm down the middle. That if anybody doubted that we live in a divided society, a digitally divided society, then COVID-19 hasn't invented digital exclusion. This chasm was there before 2020, but it's definitely exposed and exacerbated it. And the next slide shows that this is not just a chasm of haves and have-nots, that actually the digital divide is also a national divide, with people predominantly in the north of England more digitally excluded than in the south of England. So in the northeast of England, more than half of the adults cannot use the internet without support or have never used the internet. Whereas in the southeast, 49%, so half of the people in the southeast are extensive internet users, and only 18% in the northeast. So we live in a north-south divide as well. The next slide shows some of the numbers to help us to focus this evening on what are the benefits. The benefits to the economy, boosting skills, jobs, and the numbers speak for themselves. CBR shows that for every pound that's invested in supporting digital skills for adults, there's a £14.80 return. So that's an ROI I think that we all would be jealous of. So clearly there's no reason not to invest in this. At a time of a pandemic, it's important to see that a digital inclusion boosts health and well-being, as well as mental health and reducing loneliness. And of course, we need to level up. We have a divided and unequal nation. We need equal access to public services, and we need to drive equality. The next slide shows just some of my ideas about that call to action, about what we should do. I think it should be hyperlocal and scaled. It's really important we don't just focus on devices. And we don't just focus on devices and data, we also focus on digital skills. We need to boost confidence, self-esteem, and aspiration as well. And it needs to be delivered through policy interventions and partnership, and be systemic, sustainable, but making sure that we're creating and recognizing the ecosystems that there are. The next slide gives you a taste of what we put in our blueprint for digitally included nation. 3 asks there: a great digital catch-up, fully costed and not yet supported by the Treasury. The second one, a data poverty lab to make sure that we can close that data poverty point, and making sure the government's digital strategy is for everyone. The next slide shows just a picture of what hyperlocal and scaled means. Those red dots across the country, but also those people in those hyperlocal communities supporting people, yes, importantly face-to-face, but also now on Zoom, on WhatsApp, and in safe social distance environments. And then the next slide, finally, I just wanted to show these photos of all these smiling people. They're just a very small handful of the thousands and thousands of people that we began to support through devices.now, working with future.now. We've now just exceeded 12,000 people supported with devices. But I wanted to leave you with the message that tonight, let's make sure that we talk about the people, the benefits that those people will experience, people who are happier, healthier, and better off. And this isn't about technology, it's about the outcomes for those people. Thank you very much.
Helen, thank you for the understanding and the knowledge and the message, a call to action, which is very important about tonight's event. Our next speaker is the Chief Digital and Information Officer at the DWP, the Department of Work and Pensions. Subject's going to be social government services and the challenge of how they are trying to maintain access. I'd like to introduce you to Simon McKinnon, CBE. Simon, welcome.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the invitation to talk here. I mean, society is clearly becoming much more digital. We can see that all the time, and it applies to the way in which we deliver government services too. More and more of our services are being delivered digitally because it gives a better user experience, it makes systems faster and easier to access, and it makes them cheaper. And that's certainly what we're trying to do as well. But people come to us when their lives most need support. And it means that our customers tend to be the more vulnerable groups in society, the elderly, the disabled, those on low incomes, homeless, unemployed. And we also support people like asylum seekers and refugees, prison leavers, and people fleeing domestic violence. And these people are disproportionately more likely to be digitally excluded. They don't have access to digital devices, they don't have access to the data services they need. And unlike many commercial organizations, we have a commitment to make sure that all of our services are available to everybody who needs them, regardless of whether they've got the ability or opportunity to use digital channels. So whilst we continue to build digital channels for all of our services, we remain committed to supporting the digitally excluded. And from our experience, there are 2 reasons clearly why people can't use digital channels. They don't have access to the right technology, or they're unable to use that technology if they had access to it. And we have an obligation and a passion really to try and address both of those issues. So in terms of the right technology, you know, we maintain a multi-channel approach. It's not digital for everything. It's digital by default. It's digital where appropriate. But in addition to that, we provide other channels, telephony, mail solutions, and our labour market services, job centres are open in hundreds of locations around the country. And even through the pandemic, we've remained committed to the people who are most vulnerable, and we still have face-to-face sessions for anybody who needs to see us, although we encourage people to use telephony, video, and digital channels where they can. In each of our job centres, we always provide access to digital equipment so that if people are trying to find work, for example, we can give them the support they need to use PCs in that location. But there aren't enough PCs available for everybody to do all the other services that they might want to access online, and we're only solving part of this problem. We're trying to help in other places as well. We'll work in prisons, where we're trying to help prisons get access to the ability to claim benefits as they leave the prisons, etc. The second problem, as I said, is because people can't use the equipment. And we work with partnerships like the ones we've heard from Helen to support local groups, voluntary organizations, to help clients who don't have access to digital devices and digital skills. There's an example for a not-for-profit in Somerset called SkillsMax, and the people who get onto that scheme get a tablet, they get a Vodafone dongle, they get credit for their telephone calls, and we also provide them with our partners with training on how to use that technology. But one of the things we learned through the pandemic is that the inability of people to use technology is sometimes overrated. We've found that as people get access to the technology, it's surprising the proportion of them that can adopt new technologies. One example was we put in place during the pandemic a new pensions credit application process, and slightly nervous that we weren't sure whether the elderly would have the skills necessary to use it. And we found, to our delight, that over 60% of applications are now coming through the digital channel. So there is a real opportunity to give people the training they need. We also offer face-to-face services. So where people need more help, we have a visiting service that goes to people's homes to try and help them raise their application, particularly when they're unable to use digital services. But across all of this, we have to recognize that not every problem can be solved through a website. There are complex needs, and people have really personal problems where we need to give them an empathic discussion of how we can help them. So not only the job centres and face-to-face, but there are other services which we continue to offer through non-digital channels such as video and telephony. One of the things we see in DWP is how many people in the society struggle to be included in the digital economy. They feel excluded, they feel underskilled, and that's a real challenge from them. And so whilst we in government can do something to help people, from a personal perspective, I would really encourage everybody who's kind enough to come onto this conference to also do everything they can to support those that are in digital poverty in our society. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Simon, and thank you for the understanding and knowledge. And the work is that is done and not always seen by your department. So thank you very much. Moving on to a gentleman here who is the founder of the Positive Transformation Initiative, the vision to tell us about exciting social enterprise initiative in this space. And I'm talking about Dan Brown. Welcome, Dan.
Hi, Michael. Thank you very much. Yeah, just to reiterate, it's a real pleasure to have the opportunity to be able to speak to everyone on a subject that's very, very close to my heart. I was, I suppose I'm speaking as a voice, as someone who believes that we have a workable, scalable solution to this, and I'll be touching on to that in a moment. But also as someone who comes very much from a voice who understands what it's like to be in an isolated, disconnected situation on the basis that I was homeless when I was 15 and have been fortunate to find some great opportunities through people like yourselves who were good enough to extend those opportunities to me. And I was able to build those into a career in technology and events, and looking at ways in which I could work to widen the impact of projects like this in society. So I was fortunate enough to form the Positive Transformation Group back in 2019. And really that's all about bringing people together to reference Helen, in collaboration and partnerships. It was about looking at the challenges that we have around collaboration, lack of resources, lack of funding, and even more so now from post-COVID. And so what we've really done is to create a network that brings people together inside a vehicle that looks at complex social problems in a different way. So what you're looking at here is basically the thinking was to stop looking at digital poverty as a charitable program. Positive Transformation Group, working with a number of other initiatives, has looked at several programs where we've delivered devices out to a few locations around the UK and realised that it's just not scalable. You know, the challenge is that this is a problem that's been going on for probably 12 years. And it's been highlighted through COVID, but ultimately, unless we do something about it now, it's going to get swept under the carpet. It will. And I personally really don't want to see that, and the people on this call, I'm sure, don't want to see that either. So to cut a long story short, what we've done is to think differently, you know, longer term and collaboratively. We've looked at lots of different resources and available pots of funding that can be accessed to provide not just a mechanism to fund these programs long term, but also a way that we can, through funding these programs properly and talking to organisations about existing money that's already there, not only can we bring money and resources into funding digital poverty programs, we can also work with organisations to unapologetically help them see the commercial value of this program. So we can show them money that's already there that isn't being utilised. We can show them how that if they start thinking about this as a business problem, that we can show them that the 20% of people that are currently disconnected in the UK society, because they are poor, not stupid, if we help them out of this situation, they will become a 20% new market segment. They'll become the future digital workforce. You know, they will become a huge value to people and organisations in this country. And to pick up on the point that Helen made about the every pound invested giving a £14 return, the sort of funding that's out there, if you just look at one pot, for example, whereby we can access things like the apprenticeship levy, show organisations how to utilise that properly, and create a profit that can be invested back into society. If you think the underutilised levy is currently at 2.4 billion, so only 640 million is being utilised currently. That's 2.4 billion that could be reinvested into these programs to help end digital poverty. And then you could put a 14 times return of value back into society on that. That makes this a very, very powerful program. What we'll also do with that, because it's about bringing everyone together like the Good Things Foundation and creating a collaboration, that's going to enable us not only to, as I say, to create the program to provide devices and connectivity, but utilising some of the programs in between, like the Kickstarter program. It will also mean that we can create the very, very essential help desk support functions that people are going to need who haven't had access to devices before. It will also mean that we can deliver programs for training to help support people as they become part of the digital connected society. And there is a very, very achievable way of doing this, which we've been putting together with a collaborative team with some very large organisations over the last 12 months, which is now ready to go, and he's going to start piloting in February. I'll just have the next slide. So the program that we've got, just to be very clear, I just want to really get to the ask of the people on the call. We have a program. It costs you nothing, basically. That might seem difficult to believe, but there is a huge amount of available funding. There's a lot of resources, and our job is to bring all these things together. So yeah, there's a huge difference between price and cost. The price to you is nothing, and the cost to you and to society and children and generations to come is going to be catastrophic. And as I've just highlighted there, that this damage is going to be generational and across society. I just want to really, really make that point. Can we have the final slide, please, Michael? So what we are proposing, again, to try and just very, very simply, is we have devised two simple options for people. One is very simply that if you get in contact with us, which you can do via the WCIT, we can show you a program that costs you nothing. It's very simple to do, and we do it for you. And it means that we can take the thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions, 2.4 billion collectively, and show you how you can put that into a pot for digital poverty immediately, or you can give it to the HMRC. It's that simple. And then secondly, to go alongside that, once we've shown you how that can be done, and we can bring you into a collaboration, so that if you want to contribute to this collaboration in a more personal way, we want to bring you into the streams that we're running to build this collaboration. So firstly, it's look at look at the unutilized levy that your organization may have. If you're a smaller organization, we can still show you how to do this. Let's get that money into the pot so that it's not going to just be going back into the treasury. Let's show you how to engage in this national collaboration. And then importantly, just to finish off, once we are doing that, we have a scalable mechanism that we can then show you as an organization how you can utilize your levy, not just for supporting the end of digital poverty, but how you can really utilize that to train, develop, upskill staff so that the digital divide and the skills that are required can be delivered across the UK, and while also supporting the investment that's required in digital poverty. So that's it from me. I just wanted to say that we're very clear. We've got a very clear programme. Everybody is welcome to come and get involved in this. It's ready to go. It's fully funded. It's scalable, and we'd love to talk to you.
Thank you, Dan. And you know, today it's about a beacon of fire, a call to arms, a call to action. It's strong collaborative partnerships, which Helen and we've all talked about with the speakers here. And we're really aiming for outcomes. And I also like to pass you on to Jason now to introduce you to the other speakers who are on our panel as well. So without further ado, over to you, Jason.
Thank you, Michael, and thanks to the speakers. We have a couple of other panel members that I'm going to introduce now, and then we're going to open up the discussion more broadly. Please keep those questions coming. There's some great ones coming in, so we'll try and inject them. Firstly, I'd like to introduce Philip Culligan, who is the CEO of the Raspberry Pi Foundation. So Philip, Raspberry Pi, fantastically innovative company. Can you talk a bit about what your organisation has been doing to contribute to solving this issue?
Yeah, thanks, Jason, and thanks for inviting me, and great contributions so far. I won't say too much background about us. We're a UK-based charity. We're also the UK's most successful computer company, which marks us out a little bit. And most of our work is focused on digital skills, computing education, equipping young people with the ability to create with technology, not consume it. But I want to focus particularly today on the fact that it starts with the computer. And one of the many things we learned at the start of the pandemic and the lockdown is the digital divide, which Helen articulated so powerfully, had an enormous impact on young people who were forced to learn at home. You know, we moved to emergency remote learning for all young people when schools closed. And what we know is that somewhere north of 1.7 million young people didn't have a device to learn effectively at home. And like, that's a problem when we don't have a pandemic. We just realized it when we had a pandemic. And I know there were quite a few questions around this. So that's that. I want to talk a little bit about that. What Raspberry Pi was first known for, of course, was trying to solve the problem of how do you give the world a super low cost, high performance PC. We're now in the 4th generation of our product range, and we think we've done that. We have sold over 35 million devices, and for $35 we can equip you with a replacement for your desktop PC. And so let's go back to just in when the lockdown first started. We had this huge problem of young people being forced to expected to learn at home without a device to do so. And the government has been running a program. It's a good program, working through schools, loaning laptops. I know lots of grassroots organizations have also been refurbishing laptops, and that's brilliant. It's a huge challenge, and we need everybody contributing to it. What we did was partnered with grassroots youth and community organizations to find the most vulnerable families and young people who didn't qualify for government schemes. And the important point I wanted to make, and again, it echoes some of the comments previous speakers have made, this isn't about shipping kit. That's easy, right? The price of solving the device problem for young people is absolutely trivial compared to the societal cost. This can't just be shipping computers to people. And what we learned through our work with youth and community organizations and social workers is about the support and advice that you need to give families to help them get this kit set up, to solve the software problems that they will encounter, to get them connected, which I'm sure we'll come on to, which is a huge challenge. And we've learned a huge amount. And we went from a pilot in the first phase of lockdown, which delivered around 1,500 devices over a few months with the support of the Bloomfield Trust, to now we're ramping up. We're on track at the moment to do 3,000 vulnerable families and young people receiving kit. And we have created partnerships with trusts, businesses, individuals who've donated their resources, donated money to help us drive this forward. I think we've raised £650,000 already so far, which is tremendous. And I just want to say a word about impact. You know, the kind of, we're doing a good piece of research alongside this work, and the kind of impacts we're hearing are about children being switched on to learning and re-engaging with their classmates, with their teachers, but they're also about easing tensions in the families. You know, so many of the families that we've been working with have been trying to give kids access to education and learning materials off their mobile phone, and competing with each other and their parents for what is a precious commodity in the house. And so we've got to recognize that this has impacts way beyond the learning experience, which are positive. So anyway, it's one example. Lots of people are trying to solve this problem, but I think it's a problem that we shouldn't just think is about pandemics. It should be possible to give every young person, every household, the equipment and the skills that they need to learn effectively at home. And I think that's something we can all get behind.
Thank you, Philip. So lastly, and intentionally lastly, for a reason, we come to Phil Smith. So Phil is a former chair and chief executive of Cisco in the UK. Has been involved in vast areas of industry, so lots of experience. But the reason why I came to him last is particularly around the fact that he co-chairs the Digital Skills Partnership, and it's that aspect of trying to bring together charity, the government, and industry. I was keen to see if that maybe brought some bringing together of the points that have been made already. What do you think is working well, and what do you think that those groups coming together need to do more?
Well, thanks, Jason. And you know, I think the testament to the fact there's over 200 people here on this call today says that this is something that people really care about. And you know, I think we have to keep remembering, as was said by others, including Helen and others, that this is a really human issue here. You know, this is a thing we have to think about, almost to be embarrassed about the fact that we're talking about this in our society nowadays, that we've actually got a set of people who are being excluded for a reason that they really shouldn't be. And so I think, you know, the thing I would say here is that, you know, there's a lot going on, and I'm keen that, you know, given our limited time this evening, that we get a chance to answer people's questions. But, you know, think about this in human terms about what you can actually do. And, you know, I think the discussion about, you know, you may feel that the best thing for you to do is to get involved locally. And in that case, get involved locally, just do it. You know, get on and do something. And if you feel you can make an impact nationally or regionally, whatever, then do that as well. So I think do as much as you can at the personal level. This is not an issue just come and listen to. This is an issue to go and do something about. But, you know, truthfully, there is an awful lot going on there. And I think, you know, Helen hates it when I say there's loads of money around, because there is loads of money around. And I'm not saying that we don't need more money to coordinate this properly, but I am saying that just throwing money at this is not the solution. The answer is to try and be coordinated properly, exactly how Helen and Philip and Simon and Dan talked about. Let's work together with this to try and, you know, achieve something, because we know in our industry particularly, you know, the scale factor is just enormous if we get it right. So, you know, get involved locally. And actually, if there's a call to action here, is why don't everybody who's on this go out and tell another dozen people about the fact that there's an issue here that they can get involved in? You've already got thousands of people in thousands of organizations getting involved there. So I think, you know, truthfully, we've got, you know, we all know that we want to solve this problem from a very human and thinking about from a human and kindness perspective. We have to do this. So there's no choice about this. We have to find a way of fixing it. And I think the great work that Dan and Helen and others are doing is very, very powerful. So just get involved in it, get your organizations involved in it, tell them it's important to do it. And I think, you know, if we all continue to focus in that way, then I think we'll get something done. And I'd love to, you know, really just stop there and let us go on and try and address some of the very real questions that have been asked today. So
great. Okay, well, thank you for that, Phil, and that's what we will do. So I'd like to trying to sort of mix some of the questions and in the hopes of tackling more than one. Coming back to Sir Ken, could I talk about, we've heard from, you know, Philip with the commoditization of IT, getting it down to a relatively low price level. There's questions in there about how cheap you can get a tablet now. So why don't we all have tablets? And there's also questions about infrastructure and access and basic problems of connectivity, all things that have been raised as we go along. So Sir Kenneth, my question to you is, do you think that it's about time that connectivity, that the mobile bandwidth and broadband to home should be seen as a fourth utility, that it's almost a basic right?
Well, I think the easy answer to that question is yes. And as we heard from DWP, it's a critical part of service delivery. And if we take that view, which I think is really important socially, we then shift the debate away from feeling sorry for people who haven't got something into it is a national disgrace that not everybody is connected. And I think intellectually that's quite a powerful shift. I think the other part that I would add to the utility point though is my point about strangers helping strangers and Phil's point about just getting out and telling other people. It needs the nation to talk about it rather than just proselytizers like us lecturing from the industry about the whole process. And I think school teachers and parents have suffered so much through lockdown that there is a much larger body of people now who've decided that technology is, as you say, a fourth utility. And what's really important, I think, for companies is everyone who's ever worked for a large corporation has known how long it's taken to implement technology. There's a feasibility study, there's an RFP, etc. It takes years to do something. COVID meant that most companies, large and small in this country, switched almost overnight from going through that turgid process to just getting everybody online and communicating. So one of the biggest barriers has always been, it's too bloody difficult, has now been dealt with for all time.
Thank you, Kenneth. Helen, can I ask you, do you think that we've had there, Phil was telling us about, you know, act locally. We've got some questions around, you know, what could people do with locally people accessing, getting the kit itself. Your foundation does a lot of work of trying to help those organisations that exist today. Could you talk a bit about what people can do locally and what is being done?
Yeah, I think that acting locally is definitely, you know, start in your own backyard, and I'm always keen on a call to action, do something, even though it might not be the perfect thing. If you do it, it's better than not doing it, right? So on the Good Things Foundation website, there's a button that says find help near me. So we could rename it Give Help Near Me. And if you click on that button, you'll find places, there's 1,600 community organisations who are active, who are willing and ready for help. Just to point out, most of them are not accepting devices. I mean, that they're not refurbishing organisations. And where I point people to if they want to actually go for devices is the Restart Project, so therestartproject.org, and they actually have compiled a list. I think though, that if you're only going to do one thing, do something quickly and do it tomorrow. As Phil was saying, do something local, but also tell your friends, tell your colleagues, tell your boss that they should be part of this. And I absolutely 100% agree with Phil that we should be embarrassed. It's not okay that we live in such a rich country and there are millions and millions of people who are excluded and so massively disadvantaged and suffering during a pandemic. But let's not forget that this problem will exist when we've got the pandemic under control. So actually, this isn't something that we can all get terribly excited and interested in, and then, you know, fingers crossed, 6 months time, 12 months time, when the pandemic's under control, we kind of go back to our day job and think, oh, that digital inclusion thing, that was just about children getting access to laptops during a pandemic. That is not what we're talking about here. We're talking about children, young people, working age adults. Just under half of the people who are digitally excluded are under the age of 60. This isn't just about old people, and of course older people too. So, and each group has so much to benefit. But actually, I think we also should just say that we're embarrassed and it's not okay. And ideally, and I think what we should really do tonight is agree that coordinated, systemic, national action is what we also need. So it's great letting 1,000 flowers bloom, and all of those organisations on the Restart Project list that are collecting devices and are getting them out to disadvantaged people, including children, are doing an amazing job. So this is not about those hyperlocal organisations, but what we need is a movement. We need to work collectively. We need to create systemic change that is sustainable, so that we don't just have this conversation again in 2 years' time, because unless we do things nationally coordinated in a systemic way, we won't have sustainable change. So it's not just solutions we're looking for, we're actually looking for change.
And
Yeah.
Jason, as just to intervene, as Helen said, you know, I mean, when the pandemic's over, you know, the point that Ken made, you know, companies have changed. They are delivering things digitally now. So, you know, we've got a whole working population who may not have access to the right kind of capabilities. We've got people claiming benefits and other things where they may not be able to get them. So, you know, the choice is not really there. We've moved. We have moved. It's moved on. We've got to get people able to just participate in society. Otherwise, we divide society to a much greater extent than it even is today. And that's not acceptable. I mean, we've just got to find a way of including everybody. And I think, you know, if we're going to grow again, as we need to do after the pandemic is over, and clearly out of Europe as well, you know, we've got to be competitive and dynamic, and that requires everybody to be involved in the same way that any diversity does. You need everybody involved. That's what it's about.
Can I just interject on that, Phil? Because I totally agree with you. I think a big part of this is about changing the narrative, and that's one of the things that we've been really invested in doing, which is going to organisations and saying this is not a charitable endeavour. The unfortunate situation is that it's always been looked at like that. I was speaking recently to Lord Jim Knight, who initiated a programme as a Labour peer that was unfortunately didn't move forward because it ran out of funding. But it was an amazing programme that can be reinitiated as part of a collaboration. But all of these programs, if we want to make this systemic change, it's all about going to organisations and explaining to them that this has to be viewed as a business problem. Because at the moment, all of the people that could fix it won't. And that is primarily because, let's look at it from a commercial. If one organisation was to put their head above the parapet, it's too big, it's too complex. And so this idea of explaining, if we deal with this now, we don't want to spend another 12 years of people in digital poverty. It's just not acceptable. But what we do need to explain is there's a vast chasm of difference between that what is and that what should be. And at the moment, it feels like everyone is focused on, well, it should be like this. And unfortunately, what it is the fact that we need people to understand that this needs to be commercially sustainable. We need to present, which is what we're doing at the moment, to organisations to say, this is how it's commercially sustainable. This is how you can utilise existing funding. This is how this can become a value to your business. This is how it's going to end the digital skills divide. And here is a very simple action that you can take to do this now. And that's what we're doing. And that's why it's so important. We've been talking to Helen's team. We've also been talking to Nuno at the Cisco Foundation as well. And for me personally, it really is, it's changed the narrative, get business to understand it needs to be commercially sustainable, and then just give them a simple way in. And that will ultimately help us collaborate, aid the funding for collaboration, and really get people, give people the ability to engage on a national and international level, because all the funding that we're identifying is equally available in the US, in France, in Germany. And so this is a massive opportunity for the UK, not just to do something amazing for our society, but also to provide a prototype internationally.
And then can I just interrupt and say, I think that the magic of what you've invented, Dan, is taking away one of the barriers. So some of the barriers have gone. We just agreed we can do things quickly. Another barrier, I'm not sure it was ever a barrier, but another potential barrier was, would people help other people, as opposed to having to be the government doing something, which, as we know, always takes far too long. So we've got the community power, which is a big victory from last year. You've come up with a solution to the money. So now we need local action where we just I don't want to trivialize it, but we bring these people together. But the two big objections were those time and money. And those two things have now, I think, been easily eliminated. And the reason I showed the photograph of the people supplying 5,000 meals a day is, to Jason's point about what is this a utility? Is this a social need? Is it a social good? Actually, we've sort of lost those labels now. People are coming together to say there's a problem, let's just solve it. And where does the money come from for the 5,000 meals a day? I don't know. They found it. The point is we can change things. And I don't want to get political, but one big advantage of Brexit is that whatever got us to where we were before Brexit is clearly not going to get us to the next step. So it's okay to question why things didn't work in the past and then to take control of changing them.
I think the other thing that's changing is the imperative. You know, we're not going to return to the world we were in a year ago. Doctors are going to do more and more health appointments online through video because it's more efficient for them and market forces will drive it. Students will do more online learning. I mean, either distance learning is going to become much more common. So many of our services are now going onto video so that we can do work coach interviews in the Scottish Islands where it's often very difficult to. So the imperative is going to make us have to move to a world where more people have to have access to digital devices.
One of the worrying things as well, Simon, is we're on a lot of conversations with large providers who are looking at how these kind of educational development programs are going to be delivered out across the UK. And a point that we were making on a call the other day was that this is amazing. You know, it's amazing we're going to deliver these systems and they're all going to be intuitive new ways of learning for everybody of all age groups. Until we said, what about the devices? Because all the people that really need these services, I think it's 16%. I think ultimately they're the ones who haven't got them. So until we can do this on a managed national level, and then work with providers like, for example, the DWP, Ingeus, Serco, and say with every proposition you're putting forward to the DWP for funding to create these, we need a national solution to align those propositions to the provision of devices and connectivity, but in a secure, managed and supported way. Because these people, when they're given these devices, no one's got the money to ring up, you're a genius at Dixon's or whatever it may be. And so we need to do that. And there's one last point. There's a massive opportunity here for corporates. If you think about cybersecurity in corporates and the fact that 80% of all security breaches are ultimately down to the user, then providing the right training to 20% of a new connected society and providing them an understanding of how to be safe and secure in a connected new way will have a dramatic impact right from the word go on the future generation's ability to not be the 80% of the problem when we're protecting our businesses going forward. So this spans a multitude of things, and to everyone's point on here, it's even if it takes us a bit longer to put the framework in place to do this nationally and do it properly in a safe and secure way, it's so important to do it now. We've got such a good opportunity to crack this.
Jason, can I pick up one of the other comments which has been
Please
on the
do.
questions, and which I think is really relevant at the moment, which is the question around connectivity beyond devices and the costs of connectivity. And I think a really interesting thing happened just in the past few days, which is the agreement by mobile phone providers to exempt from data charges videos that are streamed from BBC Bitesize and the Oak National Academy. And we partner with Oak National Academy. We create all the computing. We've done 300 computing lessons for them. And, you know, they've been a lifeline for schools, teachers, parents, and young people who have had to move again to emergency remote teaching. And just for those who don't know, so it's a complete quality assured curricula of literally thousands, tens of thousands of hours of lessons, which teachers can present to students and they can access at home. And, you know, there are, I don't know the latest numbers this week, but in the first couple of days following this lockdown, tens of millions of hours of videos were watched. And the ability, like Sir Ken said, for the mobile phone companies to come together and agree with Ofcom that they can temporarily suspend net neutrality regulations in the UK and zero rate educational content during this crisis suggests that there may be a way that we can think creatively together about which types of content could be exempt for everyone from charges. And obviously when you get to generic platforms like YouTube, it's really challenging because there's great educational content there, but how do you distinguish from non-educational content? But I think that is something which, you know, WCIT, I don't know enough about the organization, but if you've got any leverage, if you've got any power in the industry, that is a way, thinking about how we could address charges for particular types of content, where we could transform some of this debate.
Thank you. That's a really interesting idea. It's kind of a free internet version of free phone telephone numbers.
Yes, exactly. I mean, and there's questions here as well about us being more innovative in trying to give those services free as well, using our existing infrastructure. And so I wonder, Helen, you have a design and research team, don't you, that looks into ways of using technology in this space. Is there anything interesting you're seeing there that might be relevant?
Well, I think sometimes I think the point of the design lab is that we don't jump to solutions, we actually look at what the issues are. And so, you know, and I think following on from what Philip was saying, so in our Digital Nation blueprint, where we call for 100% digitally included nation, we asked for someone, the government, somebody, to create a data poverty lab. Because actually the data poverty piece, as I think we were just talking about, feels like something that can be fixed. And it feels like something where actually there isn't one solution, but there may be 10 solutions. And if you put them all in place, then we would end data poverty. So that's people just not being able to afford access to the internet. During the first lockdown, we met a woman who was choosing to spend money on data so that her children could homeschool on a mobile phone instead of food. So she was going out without food so her children could learn during the day. And again, that's not okay. But having said, let's get a data poverty lab and let's kind of do that solutions thinking so that we understand where the problems are and we come up with a number of solutions. One solution though that I'm very attracted by is one from Australia. Optus, it's a mobile network operator, has a way that customers can donate unused data at the end of the month. That data is donated to a charity. We're also in Australia, and the charity is called the Smith Family. So that's a charity that's a partner of ours in Australia. And so 1,300 children living on very, very low incomes have guaranteed data for a year through the data donation scheme. And literally the data is donated into a data bank, and that is all donated through local charities. That feels like something that, you know, it's a classic, if Optus can do it, then surely a mobile phone operator or all the mobile phone operators in the UK could do it. And actually that could release enough data that every single child is currently relying on mobile data to do their learning, that those families, so the parents to apply for work and to access healthcare and Simon's services at DWP, all of that could just disappear overnight.
Helen, there is a huge data mountain. I think one of the challenges for the providers which is is difficult to overlook, is the fact that the way they've engineered their model to actually deliver services, certainly talking to one of the big providers, it's a very, very challenging undertaking for them to redevelop. It seems like a very simple thing for us to say, kind of, and the Australian model is a fantastic one, how to, sort of swipe right and donate data. But I think it'd be really interesting if we could get a consortium together to understand what the complexities are, and maybe some of the funding that could be made available could be used to subsidise a change in that process. But from what I understand, it's quite a fundamental process or business model change that would need to happen for some of these providers. I don't know if that's the same for all.
Absolutely, Dan, but I think that's why having a data poverty lab that deploys design thinking, has people with lived experience, because I think that's the other thing, is that, and I think maybe that's where Phil, you and I think that about money is that if the community organisations who are the safety net here, right, that they are absolutely the safety net during the pandemic, they do need money. That, and when we talk about volunteering, that in the UK, people who volunteer the most have the least money, right? So let's not forget that. That people who are holding up the system at that hyperlocal level are not people like you and me sitting in nice dining rooms and places with lots of books on the shelf, right? Is actually they are people who are disadvantaged themselves in disadvantaged communities, and I think that I think Phil, we definitely do agree, like 99% of the time. I think it's just that I live in the world where I know that those organisations are absolutely living on fresh air.
So can I ask Phil on that point, building on both Helen and Dan? So Dan's building a social enterprise where we're actually using profit to do good and a positive circular upward spiral. Helen's talked about companies, telcos should be doing the right thing. They're doing them elsewhere. Why isn't it doing it here? Do you think that the IT industry, there's a moral obligation here, or do you think things have to be profit driven and be an enterprise?
Well, clearly there is a moral obligation for everybody, not just the IT industry. I just think the IT industry's got the capability and resources potentially to help solve some of this. And the point Dan's making, obviously, about sustainability is, of course, right. I mean, charities suffer all the time with getting given money and then not being given it, and so on. And I think Helen's entirely right as well, which is that we've got to, my argument basically on the money front is not that we don't need to give out, because we definitely do. There are lots of people who need money. My worry sometimes is that, people try to solve the problem, government particularly, by just putting another chunk of money and reinventing a bunch of organisations that are already there. But I'd much rather give the money to Helen and to Philip and to others who are already doing something and get on with it, rather than what the natural tendency will be is let's go and create another, digital something, panel or whatever, which will do it and will be funded to do something which is actually already being done much better by people who are on the ground. So that's really the essence of it. And I think that, but I also do think that Dan's right, that when you try to get companies particularly involved, many will do things for philanthropic reasons, many will do them for social reasons and so on. That's very good. But, ultimately, as a former chief exec, every year you have to look at it and go, can I afford to do this again? Have we got the budget to do it? You want it to be sustainable. It has to be on the basis of value that's created for the country, for the individual, for the corporation, whatever, at the sensible level to be able to make it sustainable. So, and governments need to step up to this as well, of course, because sustainability means a country that works as well, and people are included in it, and you're making the best of everything. So, we all have a responsibility here.
Yeah, I think that as an IT manager of too many years, one of the most common things I've ever been asked in more normal times is how can you help me with get kit for this good cause or that? And I think it keeps coming back to sustainability, that we need actual proper answers for these things, and that might be making kit commoditized at a price level that can be shared. We can't just rely on goodwill and secondhand recycling, etc. So that's something that I'm always keen to try and forth. we've got one of the top questions has been at the top for a while is around healthcare, and it's a bit of a theme that's going through the questions around sort of the impact of COVID. You know, again and again we say COVID has accelerated many things throughout all parts of our life that were sort of happening anyway. The healthcare specific one is going online and digitising those services. I was wondering, maybe I could ask Simon, you know, maybe not with healthcare, but with your services, how are you going to actually use them to advance digital inclusion? What's the DWP planning in this space, and are there parallels with healthcare and other services? Is COVID helping you or hindering you?
I think that in government we recognise that we have to keep our services available to all who need them, and I don't think that there's imminent possibility that we will go to digital only channels for healthcare or for the benefits that we provide in the DWP. What I do think there'll be a trend towards digitizing those, because what we'd like to see is a more efficient delivery of service to give us more capacity to do, we describe it as high touch and low touch cases, and to talk to the more vulnerable people who need a more personalized service. You know, the personal access, not a digitized one. But as I think I said in the previous question, we're on a journey now. We're on a journey where more and more of these services, both within government, local government, and of course in the private sector, are going to become more digital, and that's going to make this problem worse before it becomes better, unless we do something about it.
Jason, could I just chip in on a thought? Because a couple of issues that have come up this evening are how do we get the telcos to do something, et cetera, et cetera. And I totally agree with what Phil said, which is let's try not to reinvent anything that already exists. It is a great British habit, but let's try not to do that. But there are gaps that Helen and Phil have both identified this evening that I think the Livery Company can play a role in plugging. And as you know, in your role on the panel for homelessness, and as Dan is beginning to discover in his new days in the Livery Company, we do have convening power. So it might make sense, given this is a platform this evening, which gives us, I think, extra credibility and legitimacy, for us to look at how we might bring together 3 or 4 of the telcos that are relevant in this game, have someone like Helen show where the gaps are, and then brainstorm how we're going to solve it. It's not going via government. It's not doing any of the other things that got us to where we are, to my earlier point. It's potentially a new way of using the convening power of the Livery Company.
No, I think that's a very good idea. And what we are going to do, by the way, is we're going to, this is all being recorded and we're going to put it on our YouTube channel. And for those of us that are in the WCIT, we're also going to review and digest what's been said in this and look for those opportunities. And for people as well that are watching, please do look at that YouTube channel after the event for actually links as well about all the organisations that we're talking about. So thank you for that prompt. Can I stay with you, Sir Kenneth, and ask, do you think that some of the good things that we're seeing because of COVID, you know, you talk about the British spirit and sort of the reaction of our society in times of need, do you think they'll perpetuate? Do you think that we can build momentum, or do you think we'll fall back to some past normal?
Well, I'm an optimist, so the answer to that question is quite easy. But the reason that I showed that picture of the unknown warrior tomb is that's 100 years of that core value of us looking out for each other. And so if I look back over 100 years, it's easy to say yes. I see no reason to say anything other than yes as I look forward. Where did that 32 million come from? People who said, actually, you know what, this is important. Why did we all stand out banging pots and pans? Because we thought there was something important. I don't want to draw comparisons with other countries because it's not particularly helpful, other than to say there is no perception without contrast. And look at the way this country has reacted to this great scare of the pandemic in comparison to others. So I think this is a bedrock of the nation. It isn't something that's just a moment to try and deal with the challenge.
Thank you. Could I come back to Philip and ask, you know, Raspberry Pi is a global success. It's a great British export. Do you think that the challenge we're facing in this space is it different in different countries?
Yeah, for sure. But it's a global challenge. So, you know, we work all over the world, but particularly in the UK, Ireland, the USA, and India. And so, for example, in India, we partner with non-profit organizations like Pratham, who are an educational foundation, and we have been working with them to take Raspberry Pi, sort of mobile versions of Raspberry Pis into villages. They have volunteers there who we train. They go into the village and they're delivering lessons and education to children who may not ever meet a trained teacher in their lives. And what's amazing when you join these by video link is seeing kids creating things with code for the first time and realizing that technology is not magical, that it's something that they can have some agency over. Of course, the other thing is, you know, context matters enormously. When we're working with our partners out in India, their sense of scale on how you solve a problem is just so much different to ours. So we're having negotiations about expanding a pilot program, and they're talking about, yeah, we could do maybe 10,000, and they're talking about doing 10,000 villages as a pilot program, right? And I don't think we are addressing the problems in the UK with the sense of scale and ambition and pace that you see in some other contexts. And that's one of the lessons that I brought back from some time I spent there at the start of last year, which is we could learn a lot from how organizations like that think about resource scarcity and pace of change and urgency of solving social challenges.
And that's why I mentioned 5,000 meals a day from just one charity. I think there is a new mood of realizing we can do things, almost awaking from torpor. There was a way we did things forever, and it's just been changed by COVID, by Black Lives Matter, and by Brexit. So I think we have to grab that momentum now and just encourage people to experiment with how we can make radical change as opposed to small change. Helen, I've never heard the term hyper-local before, but it's perfect. That's exactly what I was trying to convey in my slides. It's about real people getting a grip of our lives and not depending on others.
Thank you.
The other thing, Jason, just if I could just add one more point to your question, which is what we do see in other particularly developing and emerging economies is a much clearer realization that giving access to technology and the internet is a driver for economic growth. That it is not seen solely as how can we help the poorest and most vulnerable, but rather if we want to create economic opportunity for business at a very large scale, we need to make sure that people are able to access services and products very easily in a low friction way.
And we've had, we've had some questions which allude to the, you know, isn't it obvious that this is the right thing to do? Why isn't government doing it? Because, you know, you would imagine that the cost to society in many ways of measuring is actually far more than the cost of actually tackling the problem, you know, which you said in your opening words as well, you know. So I've got a different angle here. A question.
Jason, can I just jump in? I think it's and, right? It's not or.
Yeah.
So I think that it is a driver for economic growth, but I think we need to also recall what Simon said right at the beginning in his talk, was that government can't choose who the customers are. You know, the customers of government are everybody. And I think obviously as citizens, we should all care passionately about digital equality, and we can be motivated by the drivers for economic growth as well, because that equality will bring economic growth. But actually, it's not just about businesses, and it's not just about the third sector, and it's not just about government, but government shouldn't be off the hook, because there are 9 million people who right now can't use government services without support. And actually, I would much prefer that they got the help and support that they needed to be able to have those skills, as well as making sure they had access to the devices as well, so that they could use government services online, because I think that is probably the best quality service. I mean, obviously bearing things like having an X-ray in the hospital if you've broken your arm, but you know, that absolutely online public services should be the best possible quality service, and it should be available for everybody, and government can't choose who their customers are.
So they're two sides of a coin, aren't they? As opposed to being two different subjects. Social justice is one side of the coin, but national competitive advantage is the other side of the coin. And we need to remind ourselves it's both of those things all of the time. Whether you've got heads or tails, you've always got tails and heads.
Indeed. And do we think that the one of the questions we've got here is tech is accelerating away from us all. Is the digital exclusion accelerating too? So as we have a more digital society, we've just cited examples of needing to do that. The COVID has accelerated that because we've had to go online for things that previously you didn't. Does that mean that we've actually got a worsening problem here? Is it accelerating the divide?
Yes.
Yes.
So basically the conclusion there is it's more urgent than ever.
I think I would say yes, and I also would say though that it's an opportunity because it's a zeitgeist, right? That I think more people understand the digital divide now than did before COVID. And I think just going back to what I was saying earlier, I think that what we absolutely must make sure we don't do is that we don't gain momentum. You know, a few things get going, a few extra things get going, a few more, you know, things are convened. Ken, I thought that was a really good idea. And then once the pandemic is over, people will go, actually, that's not important anymore. We're going to focus on the next thing. Is that because until this is fixed, we're not realizing that benefit from an economic point of view, and we're not solving the inequality from a social justice point of view.
And that, you know, is absolutely true for young people and learning, right? And so, yes, the fact that we went to emergency remote learning shone a stark light on the fact that lots of kids just couldn't interact with it, or it caused friction in the household. But actually, just think about how much learning happens outside of school for young people who have access to a device and the internet, that other young people that don't have those tools outside of school aren't able to benefit from and participate in. And that is a structural inequality. You know, every wave of technological innovation brings both the potential to be an engine for social mobility, but also carries the potential to widen the gap between those who have access and skills and those who don't. And our job, our responsibility, and governments, quite frankly, we shouldn't let them off the hook, Helen, but historically they've been terrible at solving this problem. Our job in non-profits and in businesses is to try to prevent the bad happening and to maximize the social mobility benefits of new waves of technology. And I think, yeah, we shouldn't let government off the hook. I'm a firm believer I used to work in government. We should not, but we also should not rely on and wait for government. That is not the best way either.
Hyper-local.
But hyper-local that's part of a local ecosystem and a national ecosystem. And I love what Philip was saying about India, you know, making sure that we've got an international ecosystem so we're learning from one another. So it's not about 1,000 flowers blooming. It needs to be hyper-local because that's where the problem is. But it also, and that's where a lot of the people who are going to make the change happen. But if it's not systematically coordinated, if it's not a collective, if it's not a movement, we're going to massively lose a lot of the potential by not joining it together.
Right, well, I'm afraid I'm going to have to draw it to a close there. We've been inundated with questions, which I thank you ever so much for the interaction of the audience. When we do these events, normally we'd have them as actually a Zoom meeting. So we'd have all of you in the virtual room together. But we got so many registrations before the event that we felt we had to run it as a webinar in this session. So thank you ever so much for those, for the interactive nature, and apologies to those whose questions we didn't get to. As I highlighted before, we will be going through all of this and looking for opportunities and ways forward and actions coming out of it. Thank you to all of the panel for speaking so eloquently and so informed. You're the wonderful experts that we knew and hoped you would be. So thank you for that. And I'm going to hand back to Michael to close us out.
Thank you, all the panelists. Thank you very much for tonight. I'd like to thank the whole team that has supported myself and Jason, from internally to the WCIT. So thank you so much, team. And Alan with the technology, thank you so much. What's brought us to here is I'd like to introduce you, without further ado, to the WCIT Master, Mark Holford. Mark, are you here?
I am. Can you hear me?
There you go. Thank you.
My background might be rather unsuitable, but on the other hand, I was reflecting possibly what we are talking about is also a need for speed. And I think we've heard very many good things this evening. And I'm interested in some of the the things that people have said. We should be embarrassed and not okay, and it's not okay. I think that's absolutely true. Need to change the narrative, make it, it's a business problem, and it's about helping others. I also like the idea that India might teach us a thing or two on how to do this at speed. And the business lesson that actually there's a 15 times return on the investment should make people sit up. As a practical outcome of tonight, I entirely endorse Sir Kenneth's view, and I think we should definitely try and move forward on that. I also think that we should try and find a way to issue a press release about tonight, because people have said, you know, that it's important to get the message out of there. And I think there have been some really very important things said tonight, and we should try and find a way to give that wide distribution if we can. So that's my one ending thought. So I'd just like to add my thanks to all the panelists, Sir Kenneth, who is a past master of ours, and Helen and Simon, Dan, who's also a member of the company, and Philip and Phil. Thank you all very much. Thank you to our team in the form of Jason and Michael, the enormous work you've done to put this together, and our hidden Zoom meister, Alan Simpson, who has built himself a reputation in the city for helping them, including, I might say, taking Sir Kenneth's picture. I think he was instrumental in making sure that the freedom of the city granted to Sir Tom was able to be zoomed. So thank you all, and thank you for your time this evening. As unfortunately you can't see the audience, all I can do is to do our wave, which seems always to be better than clapping to you all, and thank you very much.